And California retired their plants much faster. So there's a combination of things that happen in California that are unlikely to occur here.
Great, that's a good explanation. You know, you just always wonder, but I can see we're closing the plants down and not having the new production up and running as efficiently as they should cause a problem. So are we back online here?
I think so.
David, do you hear us?
David, can you hear us?
I hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I'm sorry to drop off. Glad to be back.
You left me hanging there.
Yeah.
I had to jump in. So
You know, he had lived really well, but anyway, you bring up a point. It's kind of the next question, actually. In general, are the costs of construction energy production projects increasing or decreasing in our area? And do you see this trend continuing? And I think you've touched on it already that gas-fired generation is a bridge fuel, but you see it becoming totally obsolete in the foreseeable future.
I don't see natural gas becoming obsolete.
Okay.
It's part of base load. You know, it's certainly part of the portfolio that we see for the next 20 years. Anybody who says they know what it's going to be 30 years from now is probably lying or making it up. So we know that it's part of the portfolio. We know that production is created will last that long. And we know that the creation of new energy technologies won't be fast enough. So I'm not sure I answered the question.
Well, no, I this is like.
Am I on track there?
Yeah, is the general question about the kind of the cost trends of different energy options?
Yes,
Sure.
yes.
Yeah, Paul, I think I caught most of what you were saying, and I would agree with it. Again, this is just going from, you know, personal observation over following this industry for a number of years. It's really remarkable when you look at the pace of change that we're in right now and how quickly the cost of certain technologies has been dropping, even just over the last few years. I could give you specific numbers, you know, if I could show numbers in front of you all that come from very current public sources that show large scale wind power, utility scale solar, utility scale meaning a larger rather than a smaller footprint, even storage, which historically has been pretty expensive and for that reason not really used all that much yet. There's a lot happening in terms of new technologies, but also economies of scale. You've got utilities across the country looking at new storage projects. And I think even in just the next few years, we're going to see a lot of cost parity with even more technologies. And when I say cost parity, just to put it in perspective, today, if you tried to build a new coal plant, which I can't foresee anybody doing just for economic reasons alone, or even a new gas plant, you're already at cost parity when you look at it's called the levelized cost of energy, but basically the energy charge you see on your utility bill for a new solar project that's built at scale and using best practices, that's cost parity today, even in a place like Michigan, which 5 years ago would have really surprised me, but we find ourselves there. And I would say another thing about when you're comparing different technologies, and this is definitely the right time to do it as you're looking ahead at your energy future. Keep in mind that when I talked about the kind of the older approach to energy planning and these big chunks of different technologies, that was mostly based on fuel-fired power plants, whether it was coal or gas or anything else. So what you had was an investment that typically you would build, and then over the lifetime, you would spend a lot of money on the fuel, of just buying the fuel year after year to burn in that power plant. And so that's where a lot of your costs came from. And, if you had a plant for 35, 40, 50 years, that's a lot of volatility over time in terms of fuel price risk that you have to make sure you're thinking about. The difference with a lot of these newer technologies, the renewables, including wind and solar, and really hydroelectric has always been this way, is that all of the cost is up front primarily. So you build the energy project, and then the fuel, if you will, is free. So it's kind of a different way to think about the long-term price stream. But once you've built that device or that project, and you know very well from engineering practices how it will perform over its lifetime, that cost is locked in. So one of the benefits of these kinds of technologies that are not reliant on fuel is that over a 50-year lifetime or whatever the life of the project is, with great certainty how much as a ratepayer you'll be paying then as you will today. And that's got some value that really should be considered into the full decision.
Interesting point. I hadn't thought about that. I'm thinking about just the capital outlay initially.
And interesting enough, for the surprising things have been storage. I never thought that we would be talking about batteries to commercial level stuff. But what's changed the economics on that are electric cars. So at the end of the life of the battery for an electric car, it doesn't work very well for an electric car, but it does work pretty well for grid support because it doesn't have to have all of the cells perfectly packed. So one of the cheapest ways to reuse a car battery is to use it for this type of thing. So that was a very interesting change. I had a fun paper on that with the engineers a few years ago. So,
that's interesting. I'm a recycler. I love that idea, being able to recycle those batteries. From your information that you currently have or projections you're seeing, what are you seeing for battery life? Because that's always what I've heard as an argument against solar and wind, is that the battery storage is so short. They're not economically, you still need to have an instant on power plant. So
I mean, you have to have so much inertia on your grid, but I think we'll leave it the energy expert.
Did you get that, David? As far as what do you see as far as batteries life? How long are? I mean, any projections?
Yeah. That's a good question. That's definitely outside of my technical expertise in terms of battery life of kinds of technologies or kinds of battery chemistries. But one of the things we know for sure is that, again, utilities across the country are already installing battery systems as a smart investment. And there are different ranges of uses of batteries on the grid. And one thing you might envision is a kind of project that a utility might use that, think of maybe the size of a tractor trailer. A battery that big could be a megawatt in size. These are very large systems in some cases. But the cool thing about storage, the very valuable thing about storage, is that it can be modular. As with a lot of these technologies that generate renewable energy, you can build as much or as little as you need, and the unit cost really, there are some differences in terms of some economies of scale, but largely it's modular. You can add as you need. And so you're not committing to this one big piece of something that you may not need 50 years from now. So it's a much more manageable size that you can add to your system. Also, there's a lot of really smart companies out there thinking about long-term storage, how you integrate it with the grid. And one of the really interesting ideas I've seen is that there's already this idea of using electric vehicles as more of those are purchased and put into operation. They kind of form a giant battery because at any given time, most cars are not on the road. And so with smart technology, you can utilize this as kind of one big aggregated battery with people coming and going all the time. But then there are certain attributes of a car battery that make it good for that purpose, where over time you'll get natural degradation with that physical thing, that maybe at some point it reaches the end of a life to be useful in a car, but that can be harvested out of a car and packaged together with other similar batteries of a certain age and still have a viable life going forward as stationary storage on the grid. And so there are a lot of this, again, this is really moving, this is a moving picture in terms of technology and the dynamics of how quickly things are evolving and costs are coming down and how things are fitting together in ways, technically speaking, that we really couldn't have even, imagined 20, 30, 40 years ago, when we really had certain technologies and we were, they're set up to be used certain ways. We're in a much different place today.
Thank you. Interesting. I have all kinds of questions going in my mind to add to this, but I better stay to the agenda here. Well, you said that natural gas will be with us for a while. That probably won't ever be out of our portfolio mix. But what do you see? I think you alluded to it earlier about the gas supply and price. What do you see going forward with that?
Well, so there, again, the Energy Information Administration is projecting that we're going to continue to increase our production of natural gas in the United States, somewhere between 5 and 10% a year for the next 20 years. They're seeing continued increase in production. A lot of that they're hoping to sell overseas. We'll see how lucky they get on that. But depending on the assumptions you throw into the model, the cost of natural gas per million BTU ranges from about $3 to about $7 or $8. So you're seeing a big range, and depending on what happens elsewhere in the world or elsewhere in the United States, you'll have that volatility. In fact, natural gas historically has been one of the more volatile in pricing structures. And we can already see the price of natural gas going up just because we have an El Nino here. So they're expecting a coldness in the Midwest that will result in us altering our years. So we see a lot of volatility that happens there. So it makes it much harder to project what it's going to be 10 years from now. We also have, there's different types of risk in everything that you purchase that's going to last a long time. So you're looking at something that's going to last a long time. So one of the things is that energy cost risk. But that energy can also change in price because of regulatory change. So we're seeing a lot of changes right now and a lot of in both carbon regulations here in the United States and also in other countries. And we're also seeing a lot of regulations around fracking. In order for us to continue our increase in natural gas production the way we're doing, we need to be able to continue to frack and continue to use that technology to a good extent. We're starting to see more and more regulatory hurdles to move down that road. And we're seeing, even if the United States doesn't move forward on carbon regulations, the companies that we have here in West Michigan who are in the supply chain have to count their carbon for the OEMs that they're manufacturing products for. And those OEMs are looking to try and get carbon neutral. So they're going to be more likely to buy from someplace that can show less carbon. If we completely brought that cost in, that starts increasing the cost of using a particular fuel.
Okay, that's why you're in economics and I'm not. Because you can factor in all those those factors that are just that I hadn't even thought about. So
May I add to Paul's points?
Yes, please.
Yeah, just picking up, I agree completely with him that natural gas is not going anywhere soon in terms of just going away. We've got a lot of plants today that do burn gas. There's a lot of uses for gas that, over time will take time to transition away. But that said, I also agree with his point that gas prices are notoriously volatile over time. And one cautionary tale right here in Michigan is that, this is a little before my professional time, but back in, I think, the early 90s, there was such low gas price in Michigan that it drove a lot of investment in natural gas power plants. And so a lot of money was loaned, a lot of investments were made, a lot of plants were built. And within the span of about 10 years, and you can go back this and look at the price data, it shows clearly that the price had risen so high in such a short time that in a decade, a lot of those plants were bankrupt. And so this is something, again, when you build a power plant, you're talking about being, a relationship that's going to last for decades. And so you want to make sure you're really looking at the full scope of the risk over the life of that power plant. And for a fuel-fired power plant, the number one risk is going to be how well can you predict the price of that fuel, 20, 30, 40 years from now.
Thank you. I see we're collecting questions, so that's good. You two will have some questions at the end here. You've spoken to it a little bit, but we'll get back. This question is about the grid, because that is of concern of people. And so most of us thought incorrectly that the Sims plant provided electricity directly to our homes and businesses. We, me included here on this one, have since been educated that the power generated at the Sims plant goes into the grid, which is then brought back to us, which is then distributed through the board light power to the our homes and our businesses. Is the energy supply for the electric grid serving the Grand Haven area sufficient for the foreseeable future? If so, what factors would put it at risk?
You want to take it, David?
Sure, I'll start off. I'll go back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, and I think, Paul, you might have been too, if I caught enough of your comments before I dropped off there, about the MISO region and the fact that we're embedded in a grid that has multiple layers of connection. And so a lot of people come at this issue in terms of power outages. That's how you feel the reliability of the grid most directly. And one of the really important points to make is for power outages, I understand throughout Michigan, a lot of, if not most, of these occurrences really are about the distribution system. And that's things like tree limbs falling on wires during storms or ice storm damage, pulling power lines down. So when you look at if the chief concern is really about outages, the conversation really has to take in that whole set of issues as well, which, again, the distribution system are the wires that come from the transformers into your home or business. And that's all downstream of how the power is actually generated, whether it's a power plant or a solar farm or a wind farm or whatever. And so I think it's important that for reliability, if one of the concerns that people have is susceptibility or ability to manage the number of outages and the duration of outages, that really the distribution system is a key area that you need to be focusing on, and that's separate from the actual grid supply.
So any individual power plant on the grid isn't like having a generator on your house that kicks in when the power goes out. There has to be enough going into the grid to energize the system. So I don't want to go too far down the engineering edge.
Yeah.
But it's pretty complicated to say there's no choice that's zero risk. Right? There just isn't. But I can say that the number of people spending time worrying about how resilient the grid is, how much extra capacity exists across the entire grid, how to diversify what's on the grid, puts an awful lot of smart people trying to minimize that. And I hear from them in meetings that I go to every other month, where we hear what's happening in those regulatory areas. And so there's just a lot of spare work to make sure that that's there. That doesn't mean it's zero risk. And it doesn't mean that it can't fail. But it means that risk is being
Thank you. So, in your opinion, at this point in time, and It is as far as what is the power generation methods that have the best return of investment. And if you can give examples, you talked about obviously renewables, the price coming down, the places that you've seen that seem to have gotten it right. Maybe you could share with us what they did and how are they generating their power, and what is the best return on investment at this point in time.
So let David go first on that one.
All right, and then I'll let the economists follow up on that and add to it. Because it's definitely an economic question for sure. I think one of the things that I think about when I hear the term return on investment, it's really the, what kind of return on what investment? And I don't mean to, complicate the issue, but it really is important. I'm going to go back to the statement I made earlier about the fact that a municipal utility is in some ways different from an investor-owned utility because of the kind of the range of, or the length of time by which they can judge the value of any investment. So if I'm an investor-owned utility, I'm very beholden to the financial markets. I have to demonstrate every quarter that I've got a certain kind of return. And so therefore, I might leave a really good investment on the table if I measured it over 50 years, because I have a much tighter window that I have to explain to my shareholders. They may live, all of them may live outside of the investment area that I'm talking about. The thing about a municipal utility that's so great is that they can be a part of that community. They can understand the community's values and the goals of the community, the priorities over time, integrate that with things like your economic development strategy, who is there, what's important to them, so that you can ask these longer term questions. What do we want to see over the course of 30, 40, or 50 years that we as a public entity may have a benefit in making some choices with a longer term time horizon than you would have if you were a private company beholden to the market. So I'll stop there and see if Paul has something to add on top of that.
Sure. I mean, return on investment is complicated because you can get a return on investment just because of I'm selling an item, or you can get a return on investment because you're being crafty about how you're using the finances around something, or how you're able to double up on using something, right? So there's lots of that going on in your choices, and I haven't spent the time to go down and deep dive down into that analysis. But what I can tell you is that the players out there in the United States who are spending money on energy, we're seeing many more plays happening in solar. We're seeing many more plays happening in wind, and we're seeing decreasing in natural gas, and we're seeing non-existent in coal and nuclear. So all those places where all those institutional investors are looking about how to make money, they're spending their money in those three places and in those three orders.
You didn't mention hydro. Is it even talked about?
Well, hydro is complicated. There's a lot of local effects that happen when you put in a dam. And there are limited technologies to take advantage of water that doesn't use a dam. So realistically, it's, how are you going to get through all the regulations to build a dam and put a bunch of land underneath the water at this point in time in the United States? It's just that big of a hurdle.
Okay.
I've got one more thing to add too that I think is important for the conversation for a community thinking about energy strategy going forward. And it kind of plays off what you can use in an analogy of just your house. So I've talked to people before who, and I think this is becoming more and more common. People want solar panels on their roof if they can do that, if it's an option for them. And so they go straight to, let's find a developer and put solar panels on the roof. That's great. When really the first fundamental question that would be smart to ask, and this gets to the return on investment directly, is how much energy do I need to generate in the first place? And the point is, you can, hands down, the best investment for delivering energy is to save it in the first place through efficiency measures. Hands down, if you put side by side any generation technology. So if you're not serious about energy efficiency along with the rest of your portfolio, you're not serious about saving money. And the point for the homeowner would be, do what you can to very cost effectively reduce your load in the first place, and then come in and size your solar panels to that load, which hopefully will be smaller. You won't need to spend as much for the solar panels. And the analogy is, you can take it from the house level to a community level and think about it the same way. You've got, you're not alone. And I just know, because all communities, I think, across Michigan share the common trait that we have a relatively old housing and building stock, greatly in need of upgrading. But the real advantage there is that there's a lot of opportunity to go after with cost-effective, affordable energy efficiency programs. The trick often is, how do you pay for it? Once you can find a way to get the kind of the kickstart of the capital up front, then you can actually start saving energy, saving money, and plow some of that savings back into more investment and efficiency. It's how do you get that virtuous cycle going? So whatever the generation technology is that you might decide to invest in, I would encourage wholeheartedly a very robust energy efficiency program as well, that complements the supply side.
Energy savings generally has an ROI of 1, 2, or 3 years. We're generating electricity. We talk in ROIs decades. So there's a big difference in how fast you're getting that money.
Good point, Walter. Thank you. This is the pro and con question, risk and reward, kind of bringing us back here. In your opinion, the risk and reward, the pro and con of continuing to buy off the electrical grid, but constructing using a 30-year bond commitment, a 12.5 megawatt hour gas-fired peaker plant, which would only be used 5% of the time, but which would also meet the state required reserve capacity amount, or continuing to buy 100% off the grid, including reserve capacity purchases, and waiting 5 years to see what changes take place in renewable energy production and the developing energy storage technology. That's kind of a long question. I hope you have them both in front of you, or you both have them in front of you so that you can, but you're getting at the crux of the Grand Haven issue with this question. So anybody want to take pros and cons?
Paul, would you like me to take the first crack at it?
Let's give you first whack. I'm much better at cleanup there.
I would say, in some ways, the question might be a false choice. And I think about it in terms of this. It's either, because what I'm thinking of is, not doing an investment right now in whatever decision you're making is, and if you have a near-term alternative, you can look at that as an option. So options have pros and cons, but in this sense, it's an option that you're purchasing to buy more time, if you will. But the option isn't buying more time to then decide 5 or 10 years from now. The option is, while you're selecting that option, you don't have to be doing nothing. You can be, or you should be, I would advise any community, really take a look at what energy efficiency fundamentals you have that you can leverage, and really start plowing dollars into those kinds of investments. Those are going to be, if you're leaving those on the table, in a sense, you're wasting money as long as you let those investments go by. And so you can be making positive returns on those smaller initial investments while you get information. Another thing about energy efficiency that's really, I think, useful is that it requires people going into buildings and having conversations with homeowners and business owners and people in institutions that are having these services. It gets people thinking more about how they use and get their energy. And so that can maybe help the dialogue going forward, of more people kind of understanding, being in this conversation about energy through saving it in the first place. But absolutely, I would say, again, I would advise any community. Things are changing so rapidly right now in terms of technology and economies of scale of new technologies ramping up, that I would be very careful about making a long-term investment of any kind until you fully studied all options, because once you've made an investment, that's a relationship for a power plant of many decades, and you're that you don't want a stranded asset if that's one of the possible outcomes at all. To
That is, please, what's a stranded asset?
A stranded asset would be something that you pay today and it makes sense today, but if enough time goes by, it's lost its value or even becomes something that costs you. And a specific example for this case would be back to the natural gas issue or coal or any fossil fuel right now. If you're paying attention to, policy discussions from international on down to the local level across this country, you've got people thinking very carefully, and you've got utility companies all around the world thinking very carefully about, what will I do if carbon suddenly has a cost? And so the fossil-based fuels are suddenly more expensive than just their market price today, because they've got this carbon burden. And I don't know if that's going to happen next year, 5 years, or 10 years from now. 20 years from now, I'm thinking that's, I could realistically see something like that in place, if not sooner.
So to me, it's about risk tolerance. Those two choices have different risks associated with them. And different people weigh those risks differently. So depending on who you are, one risk might be more important than another. But as I look at things like energy production risk, or if I look at which fuel is going to be most cost-effective risk, buying from the grid is sort of like buying 401k on an index fund, where you're buying the entire market. So if something doesn't work or does work, you have all the rest of it to support it. Whereas you're sort of looking at buying one stock. So if it does really, really well, you'll do really, really well. If it does really, really poorly, you'll do really, really poorly. So it's that risk tolerance, that thought about risk versus what rewards might occur or might not occur, that you really have to take into as a community. I can't make that risk tolerance decision. You have to.
A follow-up question that just came to my mind is that if we waited 5 years to do any kind of, if we decide we want to do produce any kind of power here, that we would wait 5 years and then decide which kind of power to produce. But yet we talked about how fast things have changed, and I don't see them slowing down. So kind of like buying into the stock market, to use your example, do you have a thought on when it is the best time, if you're going to do something like this, to buy in?
Never time the market. Always.
I know, that's why.
But we do know something about this market. We know something about where we are in innovation. So we know that we're on a very flat part of the innovation curve for natural gas. We've just gotten on to a flat part of the innovation curve for wind, particularly onshore. So when you think about innovation curves, it's called an S curve. When you first start, there are very slow gains made. And then you reach this point where all of a sudden lots of things change really, really fast. All right. So you think of the internet between 1995 and 2005. Boom. It created a lot of wealth for the United States in a very short period of time. And now we're sort of curving off on that. All right. Solar is still on that steep part of the innovation curve. So we know that that's changing very, very quickly. It's the one most likely to move the most over the next 5 years because of the technologies that are coming into play. We also know that storage is on that steep part of the learning curve right now. You're really getting differences very, very quickly. So we know that those are the two most likely things to change the most over the next 5 years.
Let me add a couple things. One, based on, I think they're both from just pulling things that I've already said that are, I think, germane to this question. One is again, if you build something, if what you happen to choose is mostly a capital upfront investment, of course you want to buy something lower than you would otherwise have to. But even if you put a stake in the ground today on something and said, okay, the price is what it is today, but I happen to know with that certain technology, I know what my rates are going to be 20 years from now based on that. So if you're comfortable with that forecast, it's very certain over time, that can be something that you plan around, and that has value long term. Another thing that I think bears to this question is the modularity that I talked about. The nice thing about, say, solar, just because it's a classic example here, you can put solar panels on a house, or you can build a 2 megawatt or a 5 megawatt or a 10 megawatt system and anything in between. So there's nothing that prevents you from maybe starting something with a technology like solar, where you maybe invest a chunk in today, and then you wait a year and invest another chunk. So you're getting value over time and you're capturing that certainty, but you're also kind of buying an option just within that investment to add more later when it might become cheaper, or when solar starts to become much more cost effective, and you can pair that with solar, or batteries, storage, so that you can pair that with solar. So the modularity is another really important thing to consider as you make long-term investments like this.
Great, thank you. The last question that we have is a part of the formal presentation, and we'll take questions from people. Looking into your crystal ball, and we talked a little bit about carbon tax and things like that, but are there potential as well as current federal or state legislation and/or climate issues that could impact the Grand Haven Harbor Island energy development?
To me, the two most likely environmental regulations that we see on the horizon are restrictions on fracking. We're seeing that happen possibly at the federal level, depending on what happens over the course of the next month. And we certainly see it happening at some of the state levels. So because it can happen just on a state level. And we've certainly seen it happen in other countries. So there is an expectation that will happen. We also know that at some point carbon regulations will come. When? I'm not sure. Will it happen next year? Will it happen 5 years from now? Will it happen 10 years? I don't know. But we are part of the entire world, and the rest of the world is dealing with carbon regulations right now. If we want to sell our goods to other countries, our company have to meet their needs for carbon regulation. So whether we choose to go in that direction or not, the fact that we want to sell goods in Japan, we want to sell goods in Europe, means that we have to take those regulations into account. So I think those are my two biggest regulations there. I think there might also be some changes. There's a lot going on right now in FERC, which is the federal organization that handles all of this transmission stuff. And there could see some interesting changes there, but we don't have to have a whole other forum to talk about things about that. So,
Okay.
I'll just build on what Paul said. I wholeheartedly agree that this is the way the world is moving. I've been watching this space for a long time, and just in the last few years, I'm really seeing a lot of momentum that I don't think will abate. couple of things specifically for us here in Michigan. If you haven't seen the governor's recent announcement, you should go back and check the news from last month. She just announced an executive order and an executive directive just on this issue. Really the central piece of this, and it's very aggressive, it's going to put Michigan on a path to carbon neutrality by 2050. It will involve a citizen-led climate action council, or I don't know if that's the right term, but it's basically a body of people from Michigan that will set out a strategy for the state across the economy about how we're going to achieve some of these goals. It gives direction to this executive action, gives direction to the Michigan Public Service Commission to start aligning their long-term utility planning activities with these carbon reduction goals in mind. And I would also say, as a parenthetical, that both DTE and consumers and a lot of their peer companies across the country and the world are setting aggressive public commitments to carbon reduction by mid-century. So all the smart money is on the same path. And I think it's, like I said, it's not going to abate. It's going to be, this is the direction the world is going.
All right, thank you. Do we have questions, Andrea?
We do. So give me just a second.
All right.
And Gail, if you don't mind kind of just turning around, I'm going to get one more screen up here. And if it's possible, in just a minute, I'll have them right up there for
That'd
you.
be great.
Magic of technology.
I know, it's better than her just gonna text them to me. This will be much better.
We're getting there.
Okay.
The
I'm
question.
sure my class.
All I know is that I'm glad Andrea's here tonight.
I'm trying.
As I said to her today, I think I was born in the buggy whip era when it comes to technology. In the meantime,
A couple pink cards from here.
how's it?
Yeah, you know, one of these was really, I guess, directly the question was regarding solar. Right here, and I'll get that up. I'm just,
Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the
batteries.
this may be directly toward our Board of Light and Power, and I don't know if the two of you can address this, but we do have a Board of Light and Power board member here tonight. Maybe he's shaking his head no, he wasn't meant to be on the stage tonight, but anyway. Why are we not developing green power? There's ample space for a large solar farm on Harbor Island. How about wind? I estimate we could install at least a large percentage of generation on current property. Will the new gas generation have black start capabilities? And that I don't know what that means. Black start. Person in the back.
Black card capability. If the grid goes down, everybody goes black in the state. Individual power, individual units, they start on their own. They have the, let's say, diesel generators, or something like that, to provide the power for them to start on their own, provide power to their own grid. These are my questions.
Okay. So I don't know if, I'm assuming green power, you mean renewables? Okay. And I think we touched on that, and I know I can speak, I mean, in one of my opening comments is that I know our Board of Light and Power buys off the grid, and right now in that grid, there are some contracts for renewables. So go ahead.
And I can't answer it directly because I'm not there, but I can say that all of the consultant reports reporting on what was happening did have solar electric at the site. That in addition to know where you guys are all on that planning part, but I can say that those are the diagrams that I see as I researched this.
Okay. All right, so this is, and there again, this is another one that is, specific to the Board Light and Power, our local, and that is one justification for building a peak load plant is a backup in case the grid is down. With only 12.5 megawatt per hour capacity against the base load of 35 megawatt per hour, how would 12.5 megawatts per hour of power?
You keep adding per hour, so for anybody here,
Is it like fingers on a chalkboard?
Yeah, because there's a big difference between needing 35 megawatt hours and needing 35 megawatts.
Yeah.
So this question has 12.5 megawatts and needing 35 megawatts at one time. Because it's possible to have a 12.5 megawatt plant and be able to generate 35 megawatt hours for the day. So we need to be precise.
Okay.
Sorry, I have a physics degree.
Okay, then, okay, so then, I think the basic question is that if we use 35 megawatt hours and we're only building a 12.5 plant, that if the grid goes down and the world is black, that can we take care of how would that impact our community? I'm not sure that's something the two of you can answer.
Right? We need the engineer to come and tell us how much of the grid could isolate. And I'm an economist, not an engineer.
Can I still be heard in the room?
Yes.
Okay. The only thing I have to add is when I referred earlier to a lot of communities doing resiliency planning, a big question that often comes up is precisely that. If the grid goes down for whatever reason, you may have a situation where until the grid comes up, you're just going to have, some people out of power. But you want to make sure that certain key functions in the community remain powered. Things like first responders, hospitals, et cetera. Community centers that might be there for warming or cooling, depending on the season, for people who need that service. So I think that's an important question that gets to this issue of it is possible to meet those critical services without, at a amount that's much lower than what the grid normally provides for a certain duration. And that there are a lot of communities looking at different options to do that. You'll hear the term microgrid come up a lot. So can you island? Can you separate what normally operates in tandem with the grid, kind of separate that off from the grid at times when the grid's not functioning, and have that be a standalone power footprint, power supplier. Microgrids can be powered by a number of different generation methods, from fossil fuels to solar and battery. Again, there are a lot of options, but many communities are looking especially to solar and storage combinations for meeting these kinds of needs going forward.
Okay, all right.
I believe that sort of answers Black Star question.
Yeah. I do know that the hospital has a generator. I know that the power plant has a generator, not the power plant, the sewer plant and the water plant all have generators for backup. So I have been told that they all would have the backup capacity.
The energy world, it's fascinating to me. That's one of the reasons I've been in it for so long. It just keeps me interested. But one of it there's so many connections that you wouldn't normally think about. But when the power goes down, one of the things that often gets affected are fuel pumps. So that's why if you go to the gas station during a power outage, you may not be able to fuel your car because the pumps aren't operated. They're run on electricity. And so the reason I mention that is many places have emergency generators and they're there for a good reason. but they're also tied to fuel tanks that are only so big. So when the fuel runs out, how long is your power outage? Those are the kind of questions that you need to wrestle with. And what are the opportunities to make sure you're getting more fuel into those fuel tanks over time? So there are all kinds of risk planning exercises that, all kinds of questions come up. That's just one random example of how things are connected in ways that people often don't think about.
Thank you.
It seems like you kind of answered that last question.
Yeah. I think you did.
Okay.
All right, yeah, another one. Good question. On average, how much acreage is needed for 1 megawatt of solar power?
I do not know.
I've heard the number. Maybe David, do you know?
I've heard the number too, and it's not something that's in my head, so I apologize.
Yeah, I'm.
That's something you can easily Google.
Right, and I will say that and these questions are going to be saved, and we have 2 more meetings, and so we'll make sure that they get addressed in those meetings. If we don't, like something like this, if we don't know the answer for tonight, we will make sure.
Take me 2 minutes to get the answer.
I know, okay.
You may have already addressed this one.
Well, we can't have nonstop solar with the sun not shining at night, but that speaks to the battery issue.
Gail, that rooftop.
Oh,
Oh, rooftop, oh. Thank you.
In Grand Haven?
No, are you aware of any communities that have gone to rooftop solar, especially on like larger manufacturing plants?
So certainly the city of Grand Rapids has done that on many of them. So we've seen some of that. And many of the large nonprofits, so the Van Andel Institute has done that, as well as several others like that.
Spring Lake Township here has it on the roof. Barrett has a big, large array. Barrett, large.
Can you speak to anything about how much that solar is generating? Is it taking care of that, like the Van Andel Institute? Does it take care of their needs? Does it take care of 20%? Or do you have any idea?
I don't have the number off the top of my head.
Okay.
I can tell that none of this was designed to perfectly replace. It was designed. Often when we talk about solar on a roof, we talk about it more as energy conservation, reducing the need to draw from the grid, particularly during peak time. So it's actually timed well for those times when electricity is the most expensive. And so most of these are not designed to do that.
Okay. Yeah. It kind of speaks to the efficiency thing too. That that particular place, if they can reduce their need for the grid, like you just said. And I think that's coming up big. All right, so this is a battery question. Tesla has a battery that has been offered to homeowners. This allows them to buy power at a less expensive time to use for daytime needs. It kind of speaks to what you're talking about, the electric car battery. With today's battery storage technology, allow Grand Haven to purchase the necessary infrastructure to store the needed power to take the place of a peaker facility.
Yes, but so remember, we're still at the beginning stages of the S-curve on battery technology. So right now, for the same amount of capacity, remember that capacity would be limited in time. It's going to be more expensive. That price is changing very quickly, but right now, David, do you agree?
Yeah, I think I caught the gist of that. With storage prices coming down, it's still an active market that's changing.
Right, but right now it's pretty expensive.
Well, that's a complicated question. It's a good question, but the kind of the next follow-up question is for what application? There are many applications, technically speaking, in different parts of the grid, things that you would use it for where it is very cost effective today. And so, these technical questions are necessary and very complicated sometimes, but they can be answered and they can be addressed. So today there are applications where batteries make total sense, and we're seeing the evidence because more and more utilities are investing in them.
Can you give an example?
We see it happening in California. And we saw it happen in a very large scale in Australia, where they didn't have the means to get some of the fuel to those locations. So they needed to deal with renewable resources. So those places that have very large renewable resource, capital intensive things that they've done, have started to invest in doing some of the storage technology. In fact, we have them coming here and looking over the Ludington plant, which is a big storage facility. And there are places elsewhere in the United States that are even talking about that type of technology now. And there's many other types of ways to store electricity beyond just the battery. So at a house level where the electricity price is high, being able to take advantage of time of day pricing if it exists may make it useful. You have to make that calculation. And there'll be a time frame where the ROI is. You have to do the same thing you do with any financial thing. You have to make the calculations and say, does it make sense? Michigan has some of the highest residential electricity rates, certainly in the Midwest, but even in the United States. So some of these technologies start to make sense here where they might not.
Another question, I think there was a specific question about what is an example. One could be, if you look at the distribution system, again, this is the part of the electric grid that's closest to where we all live and work. It's the wires that we normally see every day. Sometimes there are places on the grid that have insufficient capacity because they were designed for a certain load. There's been a lot of development maybe in that part of town. And so an existing circuit is really challenged to deliver that, the service to that larger load now. And that you may eventually have to build more distribution capacity, add transformers, et cetera, which all costs money. Whereas another alternative might be, well, could we put a battery in certain places on the grid to bolster these weaker points? And those are the kinds of things I'm seeing more and more utilities finding really good business cases for today.
I hadn't thought about that. Okay. Wires. Okay. Okay. And another battery storage question is base load demand decreasing, and when is the peak load? Late summer? Is it affected by Coast Guard? Oh, that's a Grand Haven question, obviously. If demand is unpredictable or declining, would it be more fiscally responsible to wait a year or two before committing to a gas plant?
In an area that's large enough, demand is not that unfortunate. And it is changing. Generally across the United States, we're seeing decrease in demand. And that's just starting to change just recently. And then COVID hit. So again, COVID makes everything unpredictable. So we can't. I'm hoping that that's gone next time I come to Grand Haven. But I think you can be pretty sure that your demand is pretty well spec'd for the next few years. And I think you should be pretty sure that you know how that demand varies with time in the next few years. Certainly, time of day matters, and time of day is changing. It always used to be late afternoon, but even that's starting to change based on industrial use patterns, house use patterns, and even COVID changed the peak point of the day. many places. You can actually go as to what they expect the demand to be, that they are dispatching plants at the right pace so that everybody has power. And combined with that, you can see their prediction for the day as to what the wind power is going to be, because that will affect how much they have to turn on the other plants. And it's amazing how accurate they are. So I think that worrying about, do we know what demand is? I don't know what demand is, but I have confidence that your leaders must know what the energy demand is, and should be able to answer that question.
And just so you know, I got a text, 5 acres for 1 megawatt of solar. And
Of course, it depends on the efficiency. Sorry.
This next question is pretty similar.
I think it is too.
I think
it's how that one is kind of fluctuates. On that, you know, like you talked about, the prices can go up and they can go down. Depends on how, if you pre-contract for it, you'll know your price. If you don't, that's one of the questions. That's one of the reasons.
One of the questions in purchasing electricity, when you're purchasing it off the grid, is how much do you want to buy on the spot market? How much are you buying on a long-term contract? They both have different types of risk, and generally speaking, the managers of these types of things will have a little bit of both. It changes depending on the time of year or what they expect the cost of fuel to change. So again, it's going to matter as to what mix is used, and whether you want to be sure what the price is going to be, or whether you want to not overbuy at the beginning and pick up things on the spot price. A few years ago, in California, they made them buy everything on the spot price because they were worried about gaining and overbuying on the long-term market. So they wanted to try and make the market work. They had lots of blackouts, surging prices, and companies taking advantage of that. So buying too much on the spot market typically.
I know the Board of Light and Power bought. This is the other side of the story. They bought a contract with landfill gas that the contracts have been very high. So those are coming off and probably won't get renewed, but that was thinking that was the way to go, and it bought a long contract. And I don't think Board of Light and Power is the only one who did it. I think that, you know, I think many in Michigan did that. And because they bought long term, they've been paying the high price now that the other energy sources have been coming down.
Well, even here in Michigan, if you look at consumers versus, they have a different mix of what they're buying on a long-term contract and what they're buying on short-term. And because they're looking at their business model and their risk choices, making different decisions. So that takes something looking at specifically your entire cost structure.
Did you guys hit on pump storage? We have one more question about. Did that come up?
No.
Okay,
Doesn't say it.
give me just a minute.
Okay.
What about pump storage?
I'm just gonna say it. Of course, I can't find it now.
That term I don't know. Letting.
I think that we're talking about water pump storage.
Okay.
Can Grand Haven make use of pumped storage? Where has pump storage been used?
Where has it been used other than Ludington? It's been very limited uses across the world because you you have to have the right geological conditions. But I know some places that are looking at it in the Rockies right now and to put into addition to their wind farms, so that they can store up energy when wind is blowing. But I don't know whether they're taking this information yet, where they are in the planning stage. So maybe they knows.
Yeah, I can jump in here just to add a little bit. Ludington Pump Storage is really a crown jewel in Michigan's energy system. It's been around for a long time, and it's often pointed to globally, I think, as a storage asset that not every place obviously can take advantage of. My understanding is that I don't know if it was designed for this purpose, but at least for a lot of years, it's been used for using, when you run a nuclear plant's a very big investment, and it doesn't like to be throttled up or down. It likes to run at a nice, even pace. And so the nuclear capacity that we had on the shores of Lake Michigan was built. And then what you had was, it was selling into a market where the prices are higher during the day, not so much at night, but you've got this problem of you want to run that plant kind of in a nice, even clip, even at nighttime when there's not a lot of use and people to pay for that. So the obvious answer is, well, hey, let's take that and marry it up with a storage asset that doesn't care when it runs. Let's feed that cheap power that can't be sold at a higher price into the Ludington pump facility at nighttime. So then during the daytime, when that price is higher, you can run those turbines and ratepayers get the advantage of cheaper power than they would have to buy during the daytime. It's a really nice marriage of those two technologies. And the obvious thing to point to going forward is, at some point with nuclear, if that plant gets, plants get decommissioned and there's still that storage capability, there are other things you can marry it to. You can marry it to, large scale wind or large scale solar that feeds from many different places. But that's part of the solution to storage. Why storage and renewables make such a nice combination. Ludington Pump Storage, I think, is supremely positioned over time to continue to be used for that purpose. But just being connected more to intermittent renewables than to a nuclear plant at night.
I have a funny story I'll share with you. So remember 1999, we thought the world was going to end on January 1, 2000, and none of our computers would work or anything like that. So in 1999, I'm touring the Ludington plant, and I said, so what are you guys going to do for, to generate this energy when 2000, and when the guy looked at me and says, lady, we don't have computers here. This is all mechanical. So we were going to have power from the Ludington plant no matter what happened in 2000. So anyway, any other questions?
That's it.
That's it for questions. Anything we missed that anybody wants to raise in the audience? All right, then I've got a couple of closing comments. One of them is that in the back, you'll see Field holding up signs if anyone wants to take a sign to their yard. If you have further questions, feel free to direct those directly to a Board of Light and Power board member, or if you want to go onto our grandhavenenergy.org website, there is some contact capabilities on that site, and you could pose your questions or pose your comments. I really want to thank the two panelists we had tonight. Thank you, Dave. I don't see you now because we put up the grandhavenenergy.org web. There you are. Thank you
My
so
pleasure.
much.
Thanks to everyone for bearing with my virtual connection. I enjoyed being here virtually, though.
Appreciate the time you both have given. Your expertise is amazing, and I think we're all leaving knowing a whole lot more. The Board of Light and Power meeting is Thursday. They're going to vote on the blueprint of the plan to move forward. You can go and does this tell them how to log in? Oh, you had on your sheet to tell you how to log in to their Zoom meeting. And if you're online and you don't have this, you can go on to there again, the grandhavenenergy.org website. Scroll back, you can scroll back down to the calendar, you'll see it on there. And you just click on that link where it says on the 15th, the Board Light and Power meeting, the board meeting, and it will bring up the Zoom link. So you can log in. It is at 4 o'clock on Thursday, if anyone is interested in hearing the Board Light and Power meeting. And I think that's all my notes that I had to tell you about. But thank you again, Field. Oh, that was in my notes, I didn't catch it. 2 more forums. The next one will be October the 27th. And there you are, environmental concerns. I'm sorry. You did.
Yeah, I'm looking at these. That is,
Okay.
yeah, that is the right.
The future of energy options, and then environmental concerns. So we have October 27th and November 10th. Again, they will be available either in person or on Zoom, and you will see announcements going out about those. Yes, Field.
There's also this thing that Andrea has just put up, that if you want to send a message to the BLP about their plans, there's a link from our website.
All right, and that link will go directly to all the board members, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so you can, instead of trying to find the Board Light and Power board members' emails, if you put it on our grandhavenenergy.org website, it will go to them. Okay, all right, thank you again. Thanks again to the speakers, really appreciate it. Learned a lot tonight. Did Dave log off?
Yep.
I borrowed this.
Thank you. I think I stole it from your friend,
Yep.
your neighbor.
Andrea, I'm Dick Brink. We talked the other day.
Oh, thank
Did
you.
Did you get the email?